good evening, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. We are so excited to be able to present our second parallel event at the Commission on the Status of Women's 69th session this year. We have an all-star panel ready to really dig into what it looks like to have women in power and decision making across various levels of civil society. And we welcome all participants to drop your questions or comments in the chat. And at the end of the discussion, we will share them with the panelists. So without any further ado, I want to hand today's panel discussion over to our moderator, our founding board member, and the designer of our Global Citizen Fellowship Program, Miss Latoya Wright. Latoya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and welcome to everyone. I am so excited to moderate our talk on women in power and decision making, the equal and full participation of women in power in civil society. But before we begin, allow me a few moments to introduce our esteemed panel members. We have Ajamal Ramir, who serves as the Executive Director of Afghans for Progressive Thinking, which is a youth-led nonprofit organization in Afghanistan. Under Ajamal's leadership, APT has been at the forefront of addressing human rights crises and promoting girls' education. In Canada, Ajamal utilizes his expertise in communications and workshop facilitation to raise awareness about the educational and human rights challenges faced by Afghan women. He organizes events aimed at empowering young individuals, especially women, to affect societal change through education. We have Asha Castleberry Hernandez, and she is the founder of Diversity and National Security Network and is a distinguished national security and foreign policy expert, a public speaker, television media commentator, and a United States Army veteran. Asha serves on the board of advisors of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security and is a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In October, Asha released her book, Why National Security Matters, a memoir on her personal experience in national security. We also have Ruth Kamanga, an honors student at Ohio Dominican University studying history and political science with a focus on policy research and economic empowerment. She is committed to shaping informed policy solutions that address governance, security, gender equality, using history as a foundation for impactful policymaking. Now, beyond policy and advocacy, Ruth is the founder of HIST ED, an online educational YouTube channel providing history lessons to students without access to traditional academic resources, reinforcing her commitment to education as a tool for empowerment. And we also have Rosita Sikandari, and she is a human rights advocate, and she is currently the Erasmus trainee at the Refugee Council Lithuania, where she works to highlight critical human rights issues with refugees and strengthen advocacy efforts. Rosita also coordinates the Afghan Youth Representative Program, aligning with UN Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security to amplify youth voices in global peacekeeping initiatives. Committed to an interdisciplinary approach, Rosita integrates law, policy, and activism to drive meaningful challenges to human rights protection, particularly women's rights. So now we're about to begin our discussion. And as Cindy already indicated, as we go through the session, please put your comments in the chat box and we will get to them towards the end of the session. Okay, so just to start off, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to take part in the government of his or her country. The empowerment and autonomy of women and the improvement of women's social, economic, and political status is essential for the achievement of both transparent and accountable government. We have panelists joining us from the US, Canada, Lithuania. Myself, I'm in Germany. And we all have had unique firsthand experiences in civil society that have prevented women from leading fulfilling lives at various levels of society. So, Audrey, uh, would you please kick off our first discussion point and tell us about some of your experiences that you've observed and intervened in concerning women's full participation in civil society?
Thank you so much, Lataya, and greetings to everyone. It's a privilege to be here and discussing on this important topic. As mentioned by Lataya, women's full participation in civil society is an important discussion for inclusive governance, social progress, and sustainable development. Unfortunately, across the world, still women are facing significant barriers and restrictions toward their human rights, strengthening democracies, and also their participation into decision-making processes. Unfortunately, we also see systematic barriers, restrictive policies, and culture norms, which limit their ability to lead and influence decision-making process. Based on my experience and the context that I work in Afghanistan, after the takeover of power, after the Taliban's return to power in 2021, a woman has been systematically excluded from the society. There is a systematic pushback towards women's rights, particularly in education, employment, and public life. Afghan women are banned from school, universities, and most form of public engagement. But despite these challenges, they still continue to resist, mobilize, and advocate for their right. Over the past 4 years, we have been involved in efforts to address these restrictions through the organization that I lead, Afghans for Progressive Thinking. We are working over a decade to promote youth leadership, human rights, and gender equalities. Young women and youth have made significant achievements in the past 20 years in the context of Afghanistan, and those achievements we do not want that those achievements to be raised. We work with young women in Afghanistan, supporting them through our mentorship program, our leadership program, and also giving them platform and opportunity that they could raise their voices and engage with policy makers on international levels. In addition to education, we also engage in policy making, advocacy, amplifying voices from Afghanistan on global platforms such as the UN, European Union, and other international organizations who work on human rights, who support women's participation, and closely working on gender equality. Through our writing program, we gave the platforms to young women to share their experiences, ensuring that the international community keep informed about the situation that's happening in Afghanistan. We also use these platforms that as a practice, as a lesson learned to the other context, that what's happening in Afghanistan could be a good lesson learned to other countries who might face similar challenges in the future. So researching and exploring the situation in Afghanistan could be also a good case study for many other countries that might restrict women's participation in global in governance and decision-making process. We also recognize that in such contexts, most of the time when governments and when different entities are restricting women from civil society participation, the mental health crisis also increase. And we have experienced this, and we saw that in the context of Afghanistan. We also, with the ban on education on schools and universities, the mental health challenges are increased. We have launched a project to help young women and girls through a trauma healing initiatives that provide emotional resilience training and peer support for Afghan women facing isolation and distress. The program also empowered local women to support their communities and foster healing despite the ongoing crisis. Last but not least, it's really important in such context that the global community should stand with women, because we saw in the context of Afghanistan that Afghan women, they still continue to advocate, to raise campaign, and also to use the digital activism to raise their voices. But it's important that these supports, these stands should also support by international community and those who are involved in policy decision makers. We always say that there should be those policies that are being discussed for women. Those should be somehow negotiated with women, and it should be led by the woman, and their discussion should be included. And also one thing that in most of the cases we say that young women still continue to lead, organize, and advocate for change, but they need resources, they need support, they need platforms that continuously that they should engage with. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing that stuck out to me that you mentioned, you didn't say this flat out, but I heard it though in your description was, and this is just an off the cuff question. How has social media then impacted the advocacy that you've been able to and the partners that you deal with? How has social media impacted, whether positively or negatively, the reach that you've been able to have with regards to the advocacy work you're doing in Afghanistan?
Thank you so much. In case of Afghanistan, we still see that people are also suffering from the economical instabilities. Unfortunately, use of literacy, stable internet connection, and for example, for most of our participants to access internet connection is always challenging, and we see this as a significant barriers in the current context of Afghanistan. But at the same time, these social media has a powerful tool for the current advocacy toward human rights and women rights, because most of the young women who are currently restricted from participating in the civic engagement and to raise their voices. So they use social media to write and share their observation from the current situation, so they can engage with the global community, with the international community. We also use different platforms to train them, to engage them and raise awareness about different usage of the social media, and beside that to also find resources that they could continuously have stable internet connections and to continue engaging and that engagement should be equally to everyone in different part of the country.
Thank you so much. Just want to open it up to other panel members if they have any additional comments to this question, which again goes back to sharing any experiences that you have as far as your observation in areas where you've intervened concerning women's full participation in civil society.
I'll share on what I've observed specifically in my community, the community that I grew up in Zimbabwe, a city called Bulawayo, is really just getting even financial resources to get women to attend certain meeting points, because things are often distributed when it comes to civil societies coming and engaging with these communities. There's a lot of constraint from the family or from society, particularly for young women and girls, because while fortunately they have, permission to go to school, sometimes that's the only expectation of them is to protect them and cocoon them in that one side of life. So if they're not at home, they should be at school or any other family sanctioned place. So really, your rights or pursuing those rights or even attending a town hall or meeting is very difficult and sometimes frowned upon. So that's an observation that I've had, is that it sometimes means going against the grain of one's family in order to allow someone to fully come to the awareness or the knowledge of the rights that they have, or the knowledge of the full participation that they could have in empowering themselves and fully exercising their autonomy.
Thank you so much.
I agree with Ruth. The societal expectations for women as far as participation in the political process is extremely limited. Um, so to be able to make sure they have access or the knowledge base of these opportunities is one thing, but the other to enable them to be part of it is another situation that you have to deal with in order to be able to be part of the process. So that still goes on in 2025, and we as an international community, we have to be able to help other countries to be able to cut through those expectations and allow them to be part of the process.
Thank you so much. So with that, let's go to the next question that we have. So equality in political decision making performs a leveraging function without which highly without which it I'm sorry, which without which it is highly unlikely that a real integration of the equality dimension in government policymaking is feasible, right? So Asha, you have served as an election observer in South America, a foreign affairs expert and advisor under 2 administrations, and in other countries. So, what are some benchmarks you've seen in your experience that countries could stand to emulate to increase women's political and economic participation around the world, which you almost stepped into a little bit with your last statement?
Thank you so much for the question. I would say there's a couple approaches that you have to take into account in order to achieve a certain benchmark. One is that you have to allow grassroots or the local level to energize itself as a way to drive change, right? So I've mentioned before that working very closely with nonprofits or local organizations that know women that can be able to be part of the political process, whether it's being part of an electoral tribunal like me during the election observation work that I did in El Salvador, or running for an elected office. You have to be very intentional, but allow the local level to drive that change or drive that benchmark. And in terms of being intentional, you have to look at the quality and the quantity of that specific person too, because if you have not that many women running, but the quality is really good, you can drive numbers out in terms of people want to work very closely with that female leader. A good example of that is in Mexico with the president right now, who I admire, where again the first female president of Mexico, but in terms of leadership style, many people admire, and I think that is critical. So, and also too, when you look at the current president of Mexico, is very intentional in building her up, creating a trajectory to the presidency, and she was a non-traditional candidate. So another approach too is they don't always have to fit the bill when it comes to the expectations as far as, oh, you have to have served in all these elected official positions in order to become president. The current president has a background in climate change or in science, right? And then, so a non-traditional approach too, and looking into women that have that type of background, I think is also should be considered. A lot of us have non-traditional backgrounds too as well. So I think that should be for more consideration. Another approach too, I would say to take into consideration as far as reaching a certain benchmark. Now, the other argument is those policies that are made at top, like what I was working very closely on, that's a little non-political, but we worked on this at the United Nations, was UN Resolution 1325. So any of these international instruments that we work on, we have to make sure that we drive it back down into the local area and be able to use those models to be able to make change. So that's what I did with UN Resolution 1325. Although it's like a peacekeeping effort type of resolution, some of the aspects in it is something you can apply to in the political process, where you're very intentional that women should serve in high level leadership positions in the peacekeeping force, all the way down to in uniform in peacekeeping operations. So they're reflecting on in the field, on the operational level, and strategic level. So making sure that representation is all throughout the process and not just saturated in the local level, but you don't see it all the way up top on the leadership level, high level. Yes.
So then would you say, ma'am, that with regards to national security, having women in civil society is a must. You're going to have great impacts, positive impacts when you have women participating in civil society. Would you say that then?
Yes, and in fact, civil society, in my opinion, has better intel about what is going on in the field or in that specific country than government. So there's always has to be this alliance between the government and civil society as far as trying to maximize their efforts or achieving a specific mission. So when it comes to women participation, I think women should be part of that process, leading that process, making sure that that alliance is there, and being very intentional about it. And you see that a lot with a lot of women, whether they work at UN Women at the United Nations or other places where they are very intentional and okay, they're a representative at an intergovernmental organization, but they make sure that their ears are to the ground or they have the specific relationships with lots of nonprofits, so it all interconnects, and that's how you're able to maximize your impact. And we do that even in war, and in women especially, like places like Afghanistan, work very closely with different type of women groups in the field in order to maximize their effort, and then you saw that definitely play out in the political domain.
Thank you so much. Any of the panel members want to pull that thread that Asha started? All right. Thank you, Asha, for that. So let's get into our next question. So, Ruth, concerning women within the international legal framework, how has life in Zimbabwe shaped the way you view the effects of political instability and women's participation in legislative bodies? Which it kind of almost, this question kind of really jumps into what Asha started. How are families and children? So this is a two-part question. So this is a two-part question. So we had the first part, which is, ways in which you view the effects of political instability and women's participation in legislative bodies, and how are families and children affected by women's increased participation concerning political agendas?
Well, thank you, Latoya. That is a loaded question, but I think it's a very critical question. Life in Zimbabwe has definitely opened my eyes to the illusion of the disconnect between political life and everyday life, particularly for women. So, politics, a simple, definition properly construed, is just the decision-making process on how we will order goods and distribute them within society. So it's the how we get to that decision part that becomes very controversial and very out of this world. But just simply put, it's all about that decision making process, and it's life is very political based on that. But it's often framed as an exclusive, otherworldly realm separated from the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. For women specifically, it becomes sort of like a gulf to cross in order to meaningfully participate in politics or legislative bodies. And in some ways it is because of the long-standing patriarchal structures that historically have kept women out. While progress has been made and still is being made, this shift hasn't necessarily resonated across Zimbabwean societies and frankly global societies. The breakdown of the narratives has not either. So it still seems like very much a man's world and a man's game, and spaces that have been made to feel exclusionary to women in politics, or for the women that already are in politics, they feel complementary to them. So there's not necessarily an emphasis or focus on their ability or what they're able to do, but it might feel like it's a free pass. In the context of Zimbabwe, this looks like the quota system. So like I said, there are measures that Zimbabwe has taken to try and promote and encourage women's participation in politics, but there's been an unintended consequence that women have not earned their spot there or have not been duly elected yet. To actually occupy a seat, you have to be duly elected. And so these are the narratives, and this is what it's looking like, at least in Zimbabwe. That has opened my eyes to this disconnect between politics for women and the political realm. And so it has looked like it's been an obstacle course. And this is because it has been. Women have had to fight for the seat that they occupy, the space that they've been in. But initiatives like governments committing to targets and numbers of representation, while we need those commitments, there needs to be a strategic way in which that is met to counter that unintended consequence that women are not fully deserving of it, and this is just for purposes of filling numbers, as well as creating pathways and mechanisms that are substantive for women to fully and meaningfully participate in their locales, in politics, in legislative bodies. Why is this specifically important in the context of Zimbabwe and many sub-Saharan African countries, as well as just third world countries? This is because of the political instability that happens. When you have political instability, it creates a sense that the floor beneath you is being pulled away, and fundamental rights and non-negotiables suddenly become part of political bargaining. So this is especially dangerous for women because we know that women are always disproportionately disadvantaged by any adverse circumstance, specifically with political unstable climates. So the bargaining then becomes for survival. Women trade their autonomy or trade their freedom and their rights just to survive, just for basic necessities and survival. And it thrusts women into a desperation where all fundamentals are trading cards again for survival. So in Zimbabwe, we've seen that many women have turned to the informal sector, not out of their own volition, but just to survive. And with the nation facing one of the world's largest unemployment rates and the world's highest inflation rate now, it is completely devastating to see the effect that this has on families, especially when women feel disconnected from the political realm. Because, like we've explained, life is very much political, but there's such a gulf for women to cross in order to access that this is the situation that most find themselves in. So right now there's work that we're doing with a small nonprofit in Bulawayo, which is my city. It's called Champions Leadership Academy. And these are the numbers that we're seeing and the realities that the young children are reporting back, especially the girls who, while they are in school, still have an insurmountable burden on their shoulders about how to care for their families and how to get out of cycles of poverty that a lot of them have single mothers or that have turned to informal sector. So the informal sector has put their family in. So there's predatory loan practices and debt cycles that are actually being funneled down to the children themselves. And so all this to say, while there might be a daily win in women being able to go out, make the sale in the informal sector, there still is this unsustainable larger burden that glooms over them, and their disconnect from the political realm just makes things worse. You have unregulated systems, you have more susceptibility to exploitation there, and it's generational. So women's political participation allows them to translate these experiences into policy. We need policy that is very much tailored to solutions, because a monochromatic view to a specific problem is not going to counter it, it's not going to meet its concerns, it's not going to address its concerns. So I really believe that having women in this context, I know this is very specific to Zimbabwe, but there are a lot of patterns about this really all around the world. When we have women fully participating, they allow their lived experiences, the lived experiences of their community, as well as their worldview to translate into policy, and they become part of mechanisms that are substantive rather than performative. So instead of just having a number to fill seats in a parliament, or just having women for the sake of having women, we can actually create pathways and not just pathways rather, but actually create mechanisms and invitations for women to apply themselves, exert themselves, and create substantive policy that translates to change that can bring the common good. Because if we just have change that's visible on this macro level at the top and doesn't necessarily translate at the grassroots, we're still going to have those problems of the disconnect that is there.
So, one question I had is, can you elaborate just a little bit on the CODIS system?
All right. So maybe it's my accent getting a little in the way there, but it's like the quota, so QUOTA. So this is yes. So I'm just
Thank you.
saying it there. But essentially, there is a specific number of women that need to fill in parliament seats. So if that number is not reached, well, that hasn't happened yet because this was just introduced 2 years ago. But the goal is just to say, for every parliament session, we will have X number of seats at least being women. So it's not limited to that.
Gotcha.
And while that has made, some strides in showing people and women as well that politics is not excluded to just, or is not restricted to just men. It has created an unintended consequence where there's no resonation between women that are not in politics and women that are in politics. So it looks like, it's just a unique thing for the women that made it for the system. And it also undermines the achievements as well as the hard work and the sweat that a lot of these women put into there, because they have to be elected as well. So that's a whole complicated system. And while I hail the intent, I still think that there are more strides that we can make and be very strategic about how, because we know how strategic it is for women to be in these positions, but we have to be very intentional about how we present that and how we want it to continue.
Okay, thank you. Any other panel member want to add any comments to the question that I asked Ruth, which again, in summary, was two-part. It talked about the view on the effects of political instability and women's participation in legislative bodies, which is where she elaborated a little bit more on the quota system, and also how families and children are affected by women's increased participation concerning political agendas. Oh, yes, Ajamal.
Yeah, thank you to add what Ruth mentioned. And based on my experience working with civil society organization and mostly involved with different agendas such as 3025 and different international legal frameworks, we always see that the challenge with these legal frameworks are with the implementation. When it comes to implementing these agendas within the different contexts, whether it's like unstable, whether it's like restrictive conflict affected countries, mostly these because most of the international organization, they rely on the governments, but unfortunately in most of the cases in different governments, the government, they themselves do not give the floor to young women and girls. They are not including them. So I think as previously Asha mentioned, that mostly the issues relate to civil society should be somehow separate from like government entities, because most of the time like the governments are not properly following and implementing these agendas. For example, in the context of Afghanistan, for example, the ban on women's education and employment has led to increase of child marriage, economic instability, and raising mental health crisis. So that's the eventually the absence of women in the decision-making roles. So in these cases, we really want reforms in these legal frameworks, and it's mostly that the civil society organization and mostly international community or international organization should not only rely on government, but they should also work with the grassroots and also civil society organization directly and have their voices and then to find ways to push their governments that why they are not implementing these policy within their government frameworks. So this is my thought.
Thank you so much. Oh, yes, Asha, please jump in.
I guess. Thank you so much. One point I just want to add on is that it, in terms of increased representation, well, it does matter in this process as far as meeting these benchmarks or seeing a difference in terms of public policy. I'll give you one example. When I was working under the Obama administration and Secretary Hillary Clinton was at the time Secretary of State at the UN, we prioritized UN Resolution 1325 and CEDAW. And because she was the Secretary of State, then you had Ambassador Rice around that time and part of the process. I think even Samantha Powers. I mean, so many women up and down the ranks. We were able to push forth these two piece of legislation, both in the UN General Assembly as well as the Security Council. And we've never seen that in American history where these type of gender-based international instruments are prioritized from the United States. But why? Is because the representation collectively of women prioritizing and promoting on the international level at the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, this is good. Okay. Any final thoughts on that question? Okay. So our next point here, through non-governmental organization and grassroots organizations, which has been the theme here, women have been able to articulate their interests and concerns with national, regional, and international agendas. So Rosita, as the coordinator for Afghan Youth Representative Program, how have your advocacy efforts been shaped, and how has this organization amplified the advocacy of young Afghans? That's the first part of the question. And then additionally, how have non-governmental organizations shaped your ability to advocate or influence policy?
Thank you so much for the questions, and I would like to also thank for the fellow presenters for their eye-opening remarks. Indeed, the participation of women in every aspect of the government and life is so important than ever, because when the Beijing Declaration was passed, and we have past the years, unfortunately, there is an uneven progress on the achievements for women. Of course, there were huge achievements, but we could see that there are backwards achievements as well, especially in the context of Afghanistan, in different contexts, such as in Gaza, in Ukraine, and many other countries. So once again, I would like to thank you so much for having me here and for organizing this important discussion. To address your questions, I would like to highlight that to give a bit of background, which also was highlighted by Ajmal Jan. So for many Afghan women, including myself, advocacy is not just it is not anymore a choice that we choose to do so, but it became like a necessity. We use it to make resistance. We use it as a means of survival, so that the world hears us, so that we amplify the voices that are silenced, with whether it is ourselves or those who are left behind. And through these advocacy efforts, we strive to find opportunities so that organizations and civil societies, for example, Afghans for Progressive Thinking, they be able to amplify their voices. So to also give a background about what exactly is the reality in the context of Afghanistan, when I give that, unfortunately, the gap becomes very huge. Like the declaration, the Beijing Declarations, important aspects are not implemented in Afghanistan at all. Instead of progress toward gender balance, Afghanistan has been seen the erasure of women from public and also political life, even before 2021, and specifically after the political shift in the government of Afghanistan in 2021, or I can say since 2021. So when they are barred from holding government positions, political participation, they're completely restricted. It's not only the political participation, it's about the domestic violence, it's about their employment, education, human rights, and also many more. And in this regard, legislative bodies and public administrations, they are now entirely male dominated. So the goal of gender balance is not just difficult, it is like a reversed cycle. And regarding your point of how my advocacy has been shaped, I was born and raised in Afghanistan, and I saw beforehand like how women are excluded and how women are fighting to become like politicians, to go into the parliament, to get the votes. But after the political shift in the country, I saw the spaces, the civil society spaces, they shrunk. And it was a very difficult decision for many Afghans, especially women, to leave their country and go outside and amplify their voices from the diaspora. And my international exposure, and also like when I worked with so many organizations and now with Afghans for Progressive Thinking, I realized that advocacy could go beyond this, just speaking out, right? To shape policies, or at least influence policies, when the governments are not anymore the entities that you could rely on, as Ajmal John and fellow speakers also highlighted. So the importance of linking grassroots realities to international decision-making spaces is much more important than ever. Regarding your second question on how the organizations or non-governmental organizations amplify the advocacy of young Afghan or myself, I could say that there is an importance of building leadership and critical thinking, right? So the power of a platform we used and how we use it is due to the need in the country for for advocating, highlighting the gaps is very, very important right now. As I previously mentioned about the human rights violations in Afghanistan, we could know that through the organizations we could highlight and integrate the voices of Afghan women and those who are also marginalized. Through the initiation of the Afghans for Progressive Thinking, or APT, we launched the Afghan Youth Representative Program. And this program was also active before the Taliban came to power, and it chose 4 youth representatives to highlight and advocate the needs of Afghan women, and also specifically the youth on that regard. But after the political shift, which the program is newly launched and the call for applications is still ongoing, it aims to choose the next Afghan youth representative to advocate for the rights of those who are left behind inside Afghanistan, who are trying to be included at least in education and have the same opportunities that are awarded to men. And besides, we try to create spaces so that those voices can express themselves and connect themselves to global policymakers. To conclude on that regard, I would like to call upon the international community and also other civil societies to come together and at least be the cause and to work for the same cause, and that is a gender equality, through advocating their rights through different initiatives that we could highlight, or at least try to raise awareness so that everyone also shares the same ideas that you're trying to amplify. Thank you.
So you touched on at the end something that I really that had my mind blown, is that international integration piece. And with regards to, for example, I believe you and Ajamal, with the efforts that the two, you're connected through your advocacy efforts, how paramount is, for example, him having boots on the ground in Canada impacting what you're doing in Lithuania with regards to that international integration of advocacy?
Wow, that was a brilliant question. To address that, actually, I joined APT in 2017, and then the organization was still in Afghanistan. And on that capacity, the organization was linking and collecting the youth from different provinces of Afghanistan. And then we were able to meet west to the east, south to the north, and everyone was trying to highlight their needs together and share their perspectives. But after the political shift in Afghanistan, there was like organizations fled the country because they were there were no space for them to highlight the same thing. So the needs also increased. And from, for example, the perspective of those who are from Canada, or for example, the APT, which is now in Canada, we are trying to, we have now a broader perspective of the diaspora. We could see that there are many different organizations working in every single country. Here in Lithuania, for example, when I first came here, I didn't know that Afghans also are having, for example, advocating for their rights, etc. But through like networking, through the initiatives that we are launching, we are collecting each voices that they were like unheard even from outside the country. So I guess this networking, the initiatives, the trying to connect together definitely can work in raising awareness, and also to create that international platform all together to advocate united for increasing the voices that are unheard or silenced.
That is good. So any additional takeaways or comments for this question before I get to our last one? Okay, so some of the strategic objectives that were captured by the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action include governments making a commitment to establishing goals of gender balance in legislative bodies and committees, as well as in public administrative entities, encouraging political parties to integrate women in elective and non-elective positions and at the same levels as men, monitoring and evaluating progress in the representation of women through the regular collection of analysis, and then create mechanisms within government structures to monitor that progress. And so I would like to ask each panel member, and I'll start off with you, Ruth, with this question. Can each of you share with us what you've done to lend to some of these measures in the various capacities you have served to bring gender balance in places of power and decision making? Ruth, you first, please.
Thank you, Latoya. So I did do a fellowship here with the Global Freedom Group, which really opened my eyes to a lot, at least in terms of the know-how, the language, but also looking at the different pathways and avenues. A big question of mine was, how do I even get started? And so I just want to thank the Global Freedom Group for that. But right now, what that inspired me to do, especially towards the end of the capstone project we had to work on, was to continue my advocacy and find more spaces in which I can continue to amplify the voices of girls, specifically in decision-making processes, and combine that with my love for education. So I was able to have a meeting with the directors of the nonprofit I referenced earlier when I was talking, and to just look at the needs that are there in that community and how it is very much affecting the girls at disproportionate levels and in disproportionate ways. And part of that is really getting a good awareness on how to mobilize for resources and how to learn how to write grants and to seek that knowledge to empower the community. There's a plethora of issues that they're facing there, but to amplify those voices was just to come into a space where you can adequately analyze the problem, see what needs to be done, and then take the next step from there. So I decided to pursue other adventures as well, and now I'm part of Girl Up USA, which, because I'm based in the Midwest, so it's an honor that I am able to serve with the Midwest Coalition leaders, to seeing how we can continue to raise awareness on not just the problems, but see how we can tailor strategic solutions. So what I'm doing, at least to try and achieve that gender balance, is when we realize the work that we're doing back home in Buluwe was when we created a space for the girls to have. They're having monthly meetings. They're receiving mentorship as well. It's very expensive to dream in adverse circumstances, and so that sometimes still comes across. But to see how that inspired their peers with the boys, and so we started now a program with the boys, and we realized that in order to champion the girl child, the boy child should also be there, beside them. So it's been an absolutely amazing journey. Of course, it's very insightful. I keep learning every day, but I'm very excited that on this fulfilling pattern, on this fulfilling course, there's so much to learn and to put myself towards, to extend myself towards, and to see the result. People always say change is incremental. I don't really like that quote most of the time, but it's too. If that's the truth, it's too far away for us to just keep waiting. So that's what I've been up to in my small little circle.
Okay, thank you. Asha, to you, the same question. What have you done to lend to some of these measures in the various capacities you've served to bring gender balance in places of power and decision making?
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Global Freedom Group, for inviting me today to answer this question, because I have been working on this question almost like half of my career. And when I was provided the opportunity to serve in the highest levels of government, especially at places like the State Department, I was very intentional working on, again, going back to CEDAW and UN Resolution 1325, just promoting it, these two instruments, both in New York, UN headquarters, also in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was more, there was more work to do there because of the fact that the UN headquarters is not located there. So, but again, I was extremely committed as a State Department employee as far as ensuring that we are able to meet certain benchmarks related to these resolutions. But another approach too, as a government employee, I was very extremely committed working with the Biden administration, where we recruited a lot of women to be part of the national security process, and we were very intentional where would we place them in certain positions, especially if they're extremely influential. There's one thing where you do placement for women in positions that are just have a job, but there's another where that job gives you that influence to be able to maximize certain policy interests that support gender balance initiatives. So we were very intentional where to place women in specific positions. And I would tell you, it wasn't a smooth process. We still have some work to do on making sure both women and men support these type of approaches, where we're very intentional in making sure that women who represent our interests are in influential positions that can help promote gender-based policy. Another approach to where I worked on gender balance was working very closely with the White House Gender Policy Council. I think that was the exact name, yes. And so what we did there, we were extremely committed in ensuring that not only we talked about it and we included it in a framework or in the national security strategy, but we were also result-based. Result-based is very important in this process. And so what we did, and I did this a lot, where not only we looked at what could we do better to improve representation of women within government, but we also looked at other models outside of government to do a comparative analysis of how we did it here. And the American people have a lot of pride in making sure they reach certain benchmarks before other countries at times. So when I was serving there, Canada was actually ahead of us in terms of making sure that their administration or the cabinet at the time was 50% or more representation of women. So we were like, oh wow. So looking at other countries as models and being analytical about it and figure out ways on how we can use those same approaches, I think is important. But the discipline and the accountability is extremely important in this process. And that's what I thought of as far as in the making sure that in order to achieve gender balance goal, we have to make sure not only to talk about it, but there's accountability that's part of that process.
Thank you so much. Ajamal, to you, that same question. What have you done that lent to some of these measures in various capacities where you serve?
Thank you so much. I will start with we need more strong accountability mechanism. We need more work toward gender responsive actions. When we give platforms and when we work on these sections, we have to make sure that when we give the floor and platform to someone and we want them include, so those platforms should be inclusive. Those platforms should be somehow responsive, and it should be safe environment. So what we do through our work, I have been leading a mentorship program. We connect young women and girls and finding alternative pathways for education. I also connect them and share their articles through partnering with different civil society organizations on international platforms. And since I came to Canada, I also continue raising awareness and educating others, those who are caring about the women's issue and gender equality. I try to connect and also organize workshops and raise awareness about what's happening in Afghanistan and also around the world in different contexts, and then how we can use advocacy platforms to push policies and to bring changes to the lives of people. And at the end, we also need more partnership. We need allies, and we have to work on working with individual grassroots and initiatives that are led by women and youth themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rosita, to you, that same question. What have you done to lead to some of these measures in the various capacities you have served to bring gender balance in places of power and decision making?
Thank you for the great question again, dear Latoya. So sometimes as a young person, as a young woman, sometimes I feel that when you do not have the power, or for example, to implement something, whatever idea you have would be very, very challenging for you to highlight. For instance, when there is no government in place, raising your voices becomes very, very difficult in some contexts, specifically for Afghanistan. And when I was comparing so many countries' youth representatives to the United Nations, it was to a very sad realization that indeed those who are advocating for youth rights or women's rights in certain countries is completely different than for those in another country. Mm-hmm. So by realizing all these sad realities, I believe into the idea of education, as was also highlighted by the fellow presenters. Through education, I believe that one could understand what is exactly their rights, because now Afghan women are disconnected from the global context, and unfortunately, this is a reality. And however we try to do and fix that, this gaps is still in place, and it is kind of urgently so that we could bridge that gap again, so that women in Afghanistan understand their political rights, their political participation. In terms of what I've done internationally, in my work as an Erasmus trainee with the refugees, I try to connect with those who fled the country years ago and understand the reasons why exactly they fled the country, and to organize events and workshops for them and storytelling events, so that they also mentally be aware of what's going on in their country and try to cope with the trauma that they've already experienced. Besides me and one of my friends, we are, with the help of course, APT, we are launching a mentorship program for Afghan girls, specifically those who are residing inside the country. And we could see the need in there. And one of the participants who sent us an application mentioned that civil societies are nowadays our hope, and you're our hope, and we're counting on you so that you try to amplify our voices. So that statement was motivation for me to at least understand where is the power, so could we highlight those needs and amplify their voices globally.
Thank you so much. So I just checked the chat. I didn't see any questions in the chat. So thank you so much. I want to now first thank our panelists for an awesome discussion today. Thank you so much. I would like, if you have the time to do so, please add the links to your organizations in the chat so that the participants can know how to reach you and potentially get involved in your efforts. Also, Asha, if you could put a link to your Amazon link for your book, so that folks can really look and take an insight into your thoughts on national security. And from there, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Savi Grover, who's going to give our outro. Again, thank you all for your participation.
Thank you, Latoya, and I'm going to apologize. My dogs, you're going to hear them in the background. This was great discussion, I would say, and I would like to thank all the panelists for their time today. I am part of Global Freedom Group, part of the board in there, and currently I am working on, leading a task of submitting a universal periodic review paper from our organization here, and we are hoping to cover, we are working on covering topics from reproductive rights to equal opportunity for women, national framework on quality child care, combating domestic violence and sexual assault and all that. So if you can visit our website,
You're muted, Savi.
oh, sorry, did I spoke the whole time muted or?
I think the last thing you said was that you're leading the Universal Periodic Working Group on the stakeholder report on the United States right now.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I didn't realize. On that paper, we are trying to cover from reproductive rights to equal opportunity for women, national framework on quality childcare to combating domestic violence and sexual assault. So that report will be available on our website, Global Freedom Group, after June 25th. So you are please feel free to check out there after that. And then also, I would also like to say, if you are interested in SDG 5 network, Global Freedom Group does a great job of women empowering, and we appreciate any donation. Or if your organization is interested in collaboration or donating, please feel free to reach out. If you visit our website, there will be a donation link, and we appreciate any donation as well. So yeah, that's where I would like to end. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today out of your busy schedule, and all our panelists, Cindy and Latoya for moderating. Have a great rest of your day or morning or evening.